All right, hello, welcome back. It is Wednesday, 8 o'clock, that time again. First of all, I want to apologize for those of you who were here last week for the abrupt end of our hangout. We had some bad weather come through and all kinds of craziness happened right about 8:30, 8:45 last week. So hopefully we will have no technical difficulties today. You have some really good questions that you have uploaded, and I'm going to try to get to those as much as I can today. What I'm going to do, though, is to address, one of the question askers. I'm not going to mention their name at this point, but kind of seem to have some anxiety about the upcoming test, and I want to kind of give some advice about how to prepare. And to be quite honest with you, I wish I had some kind of magic formula or some kind of silver bullet that would take away that anxiety and help you be super successful. But I don't have that, unfortunately. If I did, I could probably make lots of money with that. Here are some things that I would recommend as the test draws near. We have a little over a month before the test, so some things to think about. One, if you don't understand something, spend as much time as you can with your teacher. Find them, come to their tutorial times, ask them as specific questions as you can. Okay. If you with them, I would say you should try to look at old tests. Look at the tests that you've taken. Look at the questions that you've missed. See if they will let you see those, and look at what you've missed, why you've missed them. Kind of do some review of the things that you think that you're struggling with a little more. Instead of sitting down with your teacher and asking them about that. In terms of what's going to be on the test, what I would recommend is that you look at the outline. That's where we're pulling our review things from. That is where every teacher is supposed to use as their guide, is in the course outline from the AP Human Geography homepage on the College Board AP site. That's going to have very specific, this is what we are expected as teachers to cover. It is what the test developers use to develop the test. In terms of what kind of score do you need to get credit, that's also a very difficult question to answer for a couple of reasons. One, every college policies and rules about AP and about AP credits and things like that. And so you really need to check with different colleges when you start thinking about that to see what kind of credit they take. I know of no colleges that take credit for twos. I know of some that take credit for threes. I know most will take credit for fours and fives. Some don't take it at all because they just don't see necessarily the value in that. I don't think that they need that to attract students the way that some others might. So I wish I had a better answer for that, but I really don't. What I will say is that in my opinion, and I've been teaching this for a long time, the value is not you get on. To me, that's not where the value is. The value is that you've taken the class. You've had a very challenging curriculum, a very challenging course that's forced you to think critically and to learn some study skills. And that's what colleges like to see, is that you've taken the class, you've chosen to do something more challenging than you could. And a lot of colleges really look at that when they look at your transcript. So I personally tell my students to take the test because they've put in a lot of hard work and they should take the chance, but that I'm never disappointed in them based on their score. I'm only disappointed if they don't work as hard as they can. So getting back to your question, though, about what to do to prepare, just every day set aside some time to study those things that you just don't feel confident with or confident about. Maybe start a study group with your friends in the class or other classes. Things don't have to be either Princeton, Barron, or Kaplan, I recommend that you get one of those as well. In addition, we're posting resources on this site every week that hopefully will also help you, both videos and text-based resources. There's some writing videos. There is some content videos. There's 4, 5, 6 content videos on each one, on each unit that we're going to go through. And of course, here Wednesday nights, I'm here to answer questions. Also, my co-creator, Katrina Granquist, the broadcast on Sunday, will also be doing broadcasts most weeks. So, and she has a very different perspective. She's been teaching for a little bit longer than I have. She was kind of I was kind of her Padawan, but I think we kind of bring some different skill sets and knowledge sets to the table. So I recommend that if you have the chance to either watch that live or watch her broadcast when it's posted later in the week, I recommend that you do that. In terms of how the test is graded, that's a really interesting question. And like a lot of students ask me, how many points do I need to get on the multiple choice to be able to get this score? And there's really no way to answer that except to say the more questions you get right, the better. And here's kind of the way this works is that the score is actually normed. And what a norm test means is that they don't create the scale where the grades are supposed to fall. Like they don't say this many questions equals a 5, this many questions equals a 4. They don't do that until after the tests have been graded. So basically they have all this complicated statistical math equations and things that are way beyond me that tell them this many students should have 5s, this many students should have 4s, this many students should have 3s, based on the complexity and difficulty of the test. And they kind of do look at the overall scores and decide based on that where those breaks occur. What that means is the better you do, the better your chances are. And it means that it especially means that the writing is important, because as an AP grader, I will tell you this: there are a lot of people that turn in essay booklets with little to no information on it. There are a lot of the 1,000 booklets I'll read in a week while grading that have a lot of very cool hand turkeys and a lot of cool artwork and a lot of cool doodling and very little in the way of actual stuff related to the course. And so the better your writing is, the better you are with those things, the more the better you're going to be going into the test, because that gives you an advantage over a lot of students who, from my opinion as a reader, just aren't prepared to do the writing. So focus on that as well. Don't just think, well, I just need to go over my vocab and prepare for the multiple choice. Look at those writing examples as well and writing samples. I am not able to share any released multiple choice questions with you. I don't have access to them, but part of our agreement with College Board is in order to get them, we have to keep them confidential, so we cannot share those. There is, however, lots of released AP previous test questions out on the web. There are some on the AP site, so if you want to go look at those, you can look at the actual questions that have been on previous year's tests. And those are a really good way to look at. And we'll be rolling some of those out as we go as well. I also will have some sample tests on the website. They are not directly from the test. They're ones that some are really good, some are kind of What I will say is, while I have not seen a multiple choice test since the 2006 exam, which was the last one they released, what they have told us is that the questions are going to start to revolve around what are called stimuli, which means you'll have something that you have to look at or read or interpret, and then have questions go with it. So it might be a map or a graph or some kind of short reading pattern they look at. So that's the way that they have told us the questions are moving. But I have not seen any change in that, because those questions are incredibly difficult and time-consuming to make, and therefore they don't release those very frequently. So I hope that helps you. I hope meeting with your teacher and sitting down and just saying, hey, please help, please do what you can, and just be teachable over the next 6 weeks, and put forth as much effort as you can. I really wish I had more to offer. I really wish I could wave a magic wand and make everybody have a 5. I wish I could, but I do not have that ability or the power to do that. So my best in your endeavor. Okay. All right. Let me continue on then with some content related questions that all right. Well, I'm going to start with, it looks like Nina has a few questions. Hello, Nina, if you're still there. By the way, if you have questions, continue to post them to the question board. I still have not quite figured out how to get the chat module of Google Hangout to work correctly. So until I do, just post your questions there, and as we have time, I will answer those. We're going to wrap up to 9 o'clock. All right, Nina's couple questions. So first, Nina says, can you discuss the different types of diffusion? And yeah, and question. And first of all, Nina, don't feel bad about that. That is a concept that a lot of students get confused on, and it's something that I also struggle with some. So basically, diffusion is the idea of we have one thing that moves through something else. Okay. In this case, diffusion is something that moves through space. All right. It may be language. It may be food. It may be, I don't know, any kind of cultural element, any kind of, whatever, political ideas, who knows what that thing is. But some kind of human geography phenomenon or concept starts in a place and moves to someplace else. And a way to kind of visualize this might be the ripples in a pond. You throw a pebble or a rock in the middle of a pond, and you see waves that come out of the center. That is a form of diffusion. Or if you drop food coloring into a glass of water and you watch it, how it kind of begins to starts off with it in a very specific spot in the water and then gradually spreads out throughout the water. That also is the idea of diffusion. In that case, it's the food coloring diffusing through water. So think about this in terms of movement, something moving from one place to another. And when that happens, I think about is expansion diffusion. And basically, this is where the pebble in the pond analogy comes in, because expansion diffusion starts with the idea of some culture element. Let's just say tacos. I live in Texas, so I love tacos. All right, tacos. Right. Somebody comes. Somebody makes tacos for the first time, and they serve them to their neighbors at a dinner party. Okay. And then all of a sudden their neighbors say, wow, we really love tacos. And then the next weekend, all of those people have a dinner party and they also serve tacos. And wow, this is awesome. And so then those people have dinner parties and they serve tacos. And the next thing you know, what started off as one person with a cultural element has now spread outward from that center point. Now, one of the important things here is, just because I have shared tacos with my neighbors does not mean that I quit eating tacos. I still eat them because, let's face it, I like tacos. So that's the idea of expansion or contagious diffusion. Starts in one place and it goes to adjacent areas or places that are receptive to diffusion. And in contagious and expansion diffusion, it assumes that every area around that center point is equally willing and accepting of being diffused. So whatever that cultural element does not meet a significant amount of resistance, or if it does, that resistance is relatively equal. So once again, think about that idea of the pebble in the middle and then the way the ripples spreading out from that. Okay. If that pebble that I throw in the pond is a taco, and the wave coming out of that is more people eating tacos, all right? And all of a sudden, I am the coolest guy in the neighborhood because I have brought the world tacos. you know, which would kind of be cool. I'd be like the Taco King guy, which I'm not, but that would be cool. I could put that like on a t-shirt or a hat or something. Anyway, so that's the idea of expansion or contagious diffusion. So there are other types of diffusion as well. Another type of diffusion that is similar is hierarchical diffusion. And this is one that my students really struggle with, the idea of hierarchical. And what hierarchical diffusion says is that a thing starts someplace, but does not equally spread to every place that is adjacent. So it may skip around and hop around some. So I may say, wow, tacos are great, and I have tacos with my friends. Some of them like them, some of them don't. And so that cultural element gets spread by a few people, but it may skip over people as well. And this is often associated with urbanization or large cities. The idea that large cities are going to be more receptive to cultural diffusion of different things than our rural areas. One of the best examples of this, and this is one that our textbook that my students uses, is hip hop music, right? So we all like hip hop, right? We're all into it, whatever hip hop we like, whether it's Public Enemy or 2 Chainz or Jay-Z, whatever. We are all into hip hop. But that didn't used to be the case, okay? Back when I was a kid growing up, hip hop was dominant in amongst inner city minority groups, okay? So if you listen to things like, you know, 2 Live Crew or NWA or Run DMC, chances are you lived in an urban area, probably most likely an urban city, and probably from African American or Hispanic groups, because that's where hip hop kind of originated, was with those groups. Well, what ended up happening was, as hip hop spread, it didn't spread evenly. So it didn't spread from the urban centers out to the suburbs and then out to the countries, to the rural countryside. It didn't do that because the suburbs and the country were not nearly as receptive to that. Okay. And so what happened is it would start in Chicago or New York, and then it might hop to from Chicago to St. Louis and skip all of the territory in between. And it might skip from St. Louis to Memphis and skip everything in between. It might skip from St. Louis to Dallas and skip everything in between. So it's this idea of being hierarchical, in that certain areas were more receptive to that particular cultural trait or cultural element than others. What eventually happened with hip hop and a lot of other things is that eventually it went from Chicago to St. Louis, and then it spread to suburban areas after that, and then to rural areas after that. And now we see and hear hip hop all over the place. It's very common everywhere, especially among young people. And so that's the idea of hierarchical, is that it's going to jump around first, okay? The other thing that's interesting about hierarchical is I think there's some pop culture generational elements to it, and that some things are going to be hierarchical in terms of appealing to youth as opposed to maybe older generations or older groups. And so if you have places that are much older or maybe have fewer access to young people, then you might see things that are slower to diffuse there that are popular with those kinds of groups. Hip hop being an example. You know, my grandmother, you know, God rest her soul, she never got into hip hop. I don't know why. She was into Lawrence Welk, and to me, Lawrence Welk was a very easy jump to hip hop. But you know, she never caught on, so it never diffused to that level with her. But it did, you know, diffuse to like my friends and things like that. So that idea that it still starts in one place, so the people in the place of origin don't stop listening to hip hop just because it spreads someplace else, but it's also not going to reach everybody at the same time, at the same rate, and with the same amount of resistance. So it's that hopping around and skipping point. Another really important type of diffusion is relocation. And relocation is a little different than the others because relocation assumes that there is a physical movement of the people that are doing the diffusing. right? This happens a lot when we see migration and immigration. We see people physically moving, okay? So the element doesn't move, the people themselves bring it with them, right? So it's not like, hey, I heard from my cousin about this cool thing. I heard about this cool thing from the person who does it, who moved in next door. All right. So that's the idea of relocation. The other, and I think where this can be confusing, is that sometimes these things happen at different rates and different paces, and sometimes it's hard to parse out these different concepts and ideas. It's hard to know where one of these starts and the other one begins. And so, you know, it's natural for these things to kind of blend together in some ways, but these are kind of the different ways that this occurs. Another question that comes up is, what is independent and what is inherited, or what culture or things spread because we are influenced by something else, and what is independently innovated, or what comes up naturally by itself. And one of the things to remember about that is agriculture is a really good example of that. Some places develop agriculture completely on their own, having no contact with anybody, like in the Americas. Some places developed agriculture because they interacted with other groups that had it. Okay, so that's how diffusion works. And just kind of think about in your school how maybe news spreads. Okay, does news spread everybody getting news at the same time? Does news spread from one person to the people in that class, to the people in the hallway, to the people in other classes? Does information spread from important people or popular people and then trickle its way down? Not that I'm condoning popularity politics, but let's be honest, sometimes that happens. All of those different processes happen in your school. Okay, all of rumors, whether they as bad as they are, spread in different ways. And so think about those as also examples of the ways that sometimes those diffusing aspects help. Okay, so I'm sorry about that. I had to shift a little bit. So Nina, I hope that answers your question. I hope that clarifies it. It is not a perfect answer, I know, but it is hopefully leads you down the right path. Okay. All right. All right. Nina also asked a little bit about agriculture, and agriculture is a really, really broad topic. And we're going to release a series of videos in a few weeks all about agriculture, kind of reviewing those major concepts. But what I will kind of touch on before we get too far into that, I will kind of touch on it just a little bit today. So think about the evolution of agriculture. When does it start? How does it change? What are the stages that agriculture goes through? What are the innovations that occur over time? Keeping in mind that this is a 10,000-year process, not just a process over a couple of weeks or months. Also think about it in terms of does climate and how's climate affect what can be grown where. So the idea of agricultural regions is very important, knowing what those look like and where they are and how they function. Knowing commercial agriculture, the impacts of agriculture, knowing how agribusiness works and how those processes affect how we get the food that we get, the role of science in the Green Revolution, how do those things impact the food that we get, GMOs versus non-GMOs, how does sustainability play a role in that, and how does agriculture affect women disproportionately than men, especially some of those technological advances. Those are some things to think about. As I said, we'll be doing a lot more on that in a couple of weeks, so be watching for those videos. Just like we did population and culture for this week, we'll be doing politics next week, and then agriculture the following week. So just kind of keep an eye out for those for a lot more details. Okay, I see some of you have been putting some things on here. All right. All right, I want to real quick address a question that came up last week that I didn't do a good job of answering, and I want to apologize. I don't remember who asked it. I don't see them logged on this week. Maybe they, couldn't log in, or maybe they were just so put out by my lack of an answer that they'll never speak to me again. And I'm sorry, but I did the best I can. But I want to clarify this week. I went back and did a little more research to make sure I knew what I was talking about before I talked about it. And so there was a question last week about the idea of a space-time prism. And I have to be honest with you, that was the first time I had ever really seen reference to that terminology. It's a very interesting terminology, and I'll be more than willing to talk about it. Basically, I'm going to move again. Sorry about that. Space-time prism kind of refers to the idea of what we used to talk about in terms of what's called activity space, which is how do we conceptualize the daily, ordinary activity and movement that people go through on an everyday, normal basis. And how does that relate to some of the bigger, broader concepts of migration? And we've talked about migration a little bit being in terms of, yes, there's long migrations and short migrations and these huge migrations, but there's also everyday migrations. And so, for example, my activity space is pretty simple. I commute about 50 miles a day to work and about 50 miles a day home. I usually don't make any stops in between. However, if you might be in a carpool or something at school, and you may make lots of stops. Or on the weekend when you go out to run errands with your parents, you're going to make lots of different stops. And so those are all ideas of activity space. So where are the places that you go regularly, and what spaces do you occupy, and how do you move within those spaces? What the space-time prism is kind of a three-dimensional conceptualization of this idea, and it's based on distance and time. And so, for example, if I know that I have 2 hours, let's say that I have the cable guy is coming. The cable guy is going to be here in 2 hours. And he just called me and said, I'll be there at 1 o'clock. You need to be ready. And it's now 11. I know I have 2 hours. And so my space-time prism says, given a particular speed at which I can move, the prism defines and puts boundaries upon where I can go, the distance I can travel in that time period. So if I know I have to be back here by 1 o'clock, I can only go so far at a particular speed. All right. And so, if I go at 50 miles an hour, then I can go, X number of miles or whatever. And so the prism is the idea that this is a three-dimensional measurement, because conceptually it is. Now it's hard to go up. It's hard to go down. I guess you can actually go down pretty quickly if you fall in a well or something. But we want to avoid that, of course, because falling in wells usually does not end well. Did you get that? End well. Okay, yeah. Anyway, it usually does not end well for us, so we don't want to do that. Nor is climbing tall trees going to be a very efficient means to get to places. But because conceptually, this prism does describe all of the possible places and points within the prism that you could possibly arrive at or travel to within those constraints. And this is important, I think, both in terms of migration, but I also think it's interesting to think about in terms of industry and industrial location models. So if I am running a factory or if I'm in charge of transportation for a company, how does this affect how I plan and what I do in terms of going from place to place, and what is my now sphere of influence in terms of the market that I can reach. So that's also an interesting application of that model, not only to watching how people move within their space, but also how economic activities might occur in a similar kind of way. So I hope that answers the question. Once again, I apologize for not answering it last week, but I did really want to make sure that I had a reasonably good answer before I went off on that. Okay. Okay. Macy has a question here that I would like to kind of talk about because it is related to our culture unit, which was the one that we had up online. And so Macy, looks like you maybe, are you in Miss Lowry's class? I don't know if you're in Miss Lowry's class, but my very good friend, Miss Lowry. Anyway, if not, then whoever your teacher is, tell her thank you for pointing you in my direction. Anyway, so Macy asks about the idea of authenticity, cultural appropriation. Could you quickly review these terms? So let's kind of talk about kind of the spectrum of these things. So when cultures interact, they borrow and exchange things with each other. It's just a natural occurring process. We can't avoid it to some extent. We can do what we can to slow it if we want. We can do what we can to try to avoid it. But anytime we interact with other people that are in any way different, chances are we're going to pick up things from them. So there is a whole spectrum of different ways to think about how or the extent to which this exchange takes place. All right. So on one end of the spectrum, you have the idea of cultural appropriation or acculturation, and that is simply there's some exchange and there's some impact. So I can see the impact of interaction with X group of people or X person in my life in maybe some very minimal ways. All right. Maybe it's a particular thing. Like now I like tacos, right? I didn't like tacos before I discovered tacos, right? Tacos are not native to my people, right? But now I love them. So that's a cultural appropriation. It's a small thing. It's one particular element, things like that. All right. And there is a whole spectrum of terms that we use to talk about the extent to which that transfer occurs. All right. On the far opposite end is the idea of assimilation. And assimilation is where the blending of culture occurs to the extent that one or both of the cultures, original cultures, are no longer recognizable. It is an almost complete cultural transformation into that other element. Okay, and cultural appropriation usually implies some kind of power imbalance or power difference. That fan is kind of in the way in the shot, and it's kind of annoying me, so I'm going to move this just a little bit. Okay, and assimilation historically has usually referred to a group in power imposing their culture on others. Okay, either in an intentional way, but usually in intentional ways as opposed to unintentional ones. So think about the Native Americans, and a lot of the ways that people wanted to deal with Native Americans was to try to assimilate them, make them into white people, make them act like us, look like us, send them into our schools, we'll make them wear our clothes, we'll shave their heads and make them have our haircuts. Things like that. Think about Star Trek and the Borg. That's an assimilating effect. Okay, so there's a whole spectrum of those things. Authenticity is a very, very interesting concept because in the world we live in, there is so much cultural interaction and so many cultural elements that are changing place. The question is, does a particular cultural element mean what it's supposed to mean or mean what it originally meant? Right? And so think about things that maybe have taken on like some kind of popular meaning, like, I don't know, Buddha statues or yoga or things like that. Or, tattoos of Chinese characters. Where they're popular and they are very common in particular groups and particular circles, but do they really mean what they originally meant? So authenticity is the extent to which a cultural element maintains its natural, original cultural context and cultural meaning. And this is pretty important, I think, because I think, I have friends that like Taco Bell, and Taco Bell is not authentic. It's kind of gross, actually. But anyway, that's just my opinion. But that's an example. So when I like tacos, I'm not necessarily talking about Taco Bell, because Taco Bell has malo. That's muy malo. And so, but that's the idea of to what extent does a cultural element reflect its intentional meaning with its, original group. And the more that those things spread, the more they get borrowed, or the more they get commodified, the more that they get, used and spread, the more, the further from that authentic model often occurs. Another good example is there's a great documentary about the Seattle music scene in the early 1990s, which was right in my wheelhouse as a teenager. It's a great movie called Hype, and it's all about how when the big record companies came in and they made the Seattle music scene all cool and popular, how a lot of people in that scene kind of turned on it because it was no longer authentic. It was no longer related to what they had created and what it meant to them. And so they kind of turned their backs on some of that kind of stuff, especially the commodified stuff, the non-authentic stuff, and kind of went some different directions. So anyway, so that's the idea of appropriation and authenticity. So yeah. All right. Let's see what else we have here. All right. Nina said that helped. Well, thank you, Nina. I'm glad. Thank you for your feedback. I appreciate that. Let me go back up a little bit here to modernization, dependency theory, systems theory. All right. So this is stuff related to economic development, and this is just one of the most fascinating topics. My background is in history and political science, and so I find discussions of international economic systems very, very fascinating. And so basically, we can divide economic theories into two categories. One is what's called a liberalist model, and one that's called a structuralist model. So the question asked specifically about the modernization model versus dependency model versus a world systems theory. What a wonderful question. I could talk about this all night, but I will try not to. So for example, modernism is a liberalist theory. And liberalist theories say that all countries are on the same path to economic development, and all countries are capable of continuing along that path. That the reason why some countries are wealthy and some are poor is because they are at different points in that process. And through, I hate to use the word hard work, because people in poor countries work way harder than we do, but through hard work and effort and policies and good planning and good building your internal economies, things like that, you too can become wealthy. You too can become rich. They would point to places like China. They would point to places like India as examples of liberal models. So look at these places. These places were places of abject poverty for many, many, many thousands of years, and now they are emerging as global economic powers. Obviously, they're on this path, and this path is working for them. And the model that's most closely associated with that is Rostow. And Rostow's model basically has these several different stages that you can kind of evaluate. Am I in this stage, and how do I move? I do. And a lot of economic policy from a liberalist perspective is committed to how do we move from one stage to the next. Okay, that is one stage. I will tell you right now that Rostow is a model, and there is evidence to support Rostow. I personally am a structuralist. And you can throw rocks at me if you wish, but I am a structuralist. Structuralists argue that the rules to the game are fixed. that countries are rich and poor because power imbalances give an advantage to some to take advantage of others. And the idea being that in order to be poor, we have to have, I'm sorry, and in order to be rich, we have to have some that are poor. And dependency theory is a great example of this. So dependency theory is going to argue that wealthy countries make economic policies that benefit them at the expense of others. So for example, if you look at the relationship between the United States and basically every country in Latin America, especially Central America, there's very strong structuralist evidence there. Okay, basically what it means is, so I go to Mexico and I say, all right, Mexico, or let's not use Mexico because Mexico actually is developing, and you might put them in the liberalist column. So let's look at Guatemala. So we go to Guatemala and we say, Guatemala, we really want to buy your bananas. And they say, wow, the U.S. wants to buy our bananas. The U.S. has got lots of people and lots of money, and they're going to buy lots of bananas. And I say, yes, I want to buy your bananas. But here's the thing. We're going to buy 90,000 tons of bananas. It's going to be basically 90% of your entire economy, export economy, is going to be selling us bananas. Here's the difference. You can't sell bananas to anybody else. And we're going to give you a really good price for those bananas. So we make this deal. Guatemala gets all the money from the bananas, and we're all eating bananas, and wow, everything's great. All right. So over time, though, the problem with that structure is that we are in control of it. The U.S. is in control of that structure. They control the price, and because Guatemala has agreed that they're not going to really sell many bananas to anybody else, they don't have any options. They have no flexibility. There's no elasticity in that product. So what they're going to end up doing is they're kind of at our mercy. So as long as we are happy with our bananas, as long as we're happy with the price we get for our bananas, as long as we still want bananas, then we're going to continue to buy them, and we'll buy them from Guatemala. But what happens if one of the following things happens? Maybe nobody likes bananas anymore, and so we don't see the need to import them on the same scale. What if we find, Costa Rica now sells higher quality bananas at a cheaper price? What happens if we just decide that we really want to have a relationship with Panama, and the way the relationship with Panama is to buy their bananas? So basically, what I need out of the arrangement is going to change, and therefore I'm going to change the rules of the game. Okay, so I may say, okay, Guatemala, we love your bananas, but we're going to cut our quota back. We're only going to import half as many bananas from you because we also want to import some from Panama. What power does Guatemala have in that arrangement? Can they say, well, thanks, but no thanks? They can't do that because they don't have any other major trading partners. Meanwhile, I have all of these different people that I can buy from. And what this does is it kind of puts a lot of pressure on countries to meet the demands and meet the expectations of those wealthy countries. This is to me also one of the problems of outsourcing. Is that outsourcing works is as long as you have the cheapest price. But if someone else is cheaper, then they can undercut you and they can sell things for less. This is a fairly common problem also when you base your economy around foreign investment. So I'm going to import lots of loans and money from wealthy countries. I'm going to get lots of aid packages and companies to come into my country. That's all fine and good, but you're still depending on other people. You're depending on those companies. You're depending upon those loans. You're depending upon someone buying your bananas. And it puts you in a very, very difficult situation and a very weak position in terms of bargaining with people. So structuralist models argue that the structure of the system, the rules of the game, are set, and they are set to be manipulated by those in power and to manipulate those who have less power. And you know, it's kind of harsh, it's kind of negative. As I mentioned, China, India, Mexico might provide examples to the contrary. But I think especially looking at the United States and their foreign policies, and basically any power that is as this hegemonic power who gets to set the rules of the game throughout history, we kind of see some of the same kind of concepts. Okay, and so that's the difference between the modernization or liberalist models and some of the structuralist models. I put world systems theory in as a structuralist model as well, and that world system theory argues that once again, who makes the rules of the game? Who has the power, the influence, the access to resources, the access to technology, and things like that to be able to make those rules of the game. Okay? All right. All right. Let me see what I have to do here. All right. Next question. All right. I'm going to step away for 1 second. My cat just knocked something off in the other room. I'll be right back. Sorry about that. My cat knocked out the power cord, and I have very little power left. So, all right, I think we're good to go. Sorry about that. I tried to promise no technical difficulties, but I think we are all good to go now. All right, let me go back and look at the questions and see if I've hit on them. I think I may have time for one more. Got that one, got that one, got that one. Okay, I had two questions here on intensive versus extensive. Intensive versus extensive. Okay, so, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Let's close out the questions. So, in general, there we are. In general, think about the word intense, like something is intense, it's very focused. You're putting a lot of effort into one particular thing. So an example might be if we look at an agricultural regions chart, our map, one of the things we see is that China and South Asia are known for what's called intensive subsistence, meaning that they put a lot of effort and a lot of resources and a lot of time and a lot of effort into what they do in order to grow a few things. So they do a lot of rice production. They do a lot of cotton production in South Asia, some things like that. So it's limited in the scope, limited in the number of things that you do, limited in the number of things that you cultivate or harvest, but you spend a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of resources into those few things. So think of it as a depth versus what am I trying to say? Depth versus breadth. There we go. This is a very deep concept. So we're going to spend a lot of time and resources into one or two things. And in the case of China and India, that subsistence is based on just the sheer numbers of people. Populations are so large and so many people. Hey, the cat just jumped up here. He's the culprit for the day. Anyway, the population problems of China and India kind of force them to be intensive. We have to focus on crops that will feed people and allow us to survive, and we're going to spend a lot of time and effort and energy into that. Extensive is kind of different. Also, intensive is going to use a relatively small amount of land to do that. So we're going to pump it all into one place and pump it all into one kind of one resource and pull as much out as we can. So extensive is kind of the opposite. It's not depth so much as it is breadth, meaning there's lots of different things harvested at not nearly as intensive a way. And so for example, a lot of the agriculture in the United States is extensive in that it takes up a lot of land, but in terms of its resources, in terms of its inputs, it's significantly less. Also, the variety of things in the U.S. is an example of extensive. So you've got wheat, you've got corn, you've got rice in some places, you've got apples, you've got dairy, you've got all of the things on Von Thunen all done on a large scale. And so it's the idea of it being a variety of things. Herding and cattle and things like that. So that's kind of the main difference is, intense. So think about having a conversation and you walk away and say, man, that was intense. I mean, they were probably like going off on one thing and like really into it and like blowing your mind kind of stuff, right? As opposed to the conversation with someone that, has 17 different topics in one conversation. So that's kind of the difference between intensive versus extensive. So, and like I said, we'll do a lot more with agriculture in the coming weeks. Okay, let me go back to one more question here. Okay, so Macy, once again, has another question. All right, and let me go back to Macy's question. Macy's question has two different questions, and one deals with distance decay and with space-time compression. And so distance decay basically means the further apart things are, the less they interact. So I am less likely to talk to or interact with my in-laws who live in Columbus, Ohio, than I am my mother who lives in the Dallas area. Now, part of that is she's my mother, right? But, I love my in-laws as well, but it's just harder to interact with them. It's harder to talk to them. It's harder to visit them. So distance decay is this idea that the further things away, the less those are. I mean, the further apart things are, the less they are going to interact. Okay. Now, this can be overcome. And one of the ways that this can be overcome is through the idea of gravity. And not gravity in terms of like what holds you to the earth necessarily, but gravity in terms of significance or importance or substance that something has. So for example, this is really well illustrated in terms of cities. The larger two cities are, the more those cities will interact, even if they are farther away. Does that make sense? So New York and Los Angeles, because they are large cities, important cities with lots of things to do and lots of stuff going on economically, culturally, things like that, they're going to interact a lot, regardless of the fact that they are 5,000 miles away. However, Los Angeles may not interact as much with, say, Salt Lake City, which is much closer. Even though it's closer, Salt Lake City does not have the same gravity or the same significance or the same pull on Los Angeles. Same thing, New York may not interact with Pittsburgh as much as it interacts with Los Angeles. So sometimes that idea of distance decay can be mitigated or counteracted by the idea of gravity. And so that's that idea of distance decay and how does distance create, or how do we need to consider distance when we think about interaction? One of the interesting things is that distance decay, I think, is less of an issue now than it might have been, 50 or 100 years ago, or even 20 years ago. The fact that I'm sitting here in Sherman, Texas, and I'm having a conversation with looks like 9 different people, and I don't know where they all are. Some of them are probably nearby. Some of them may be far away. I don't know. But technology, I think, has allowed us to kind of also mitigate that idea of distance and the effect that distance has. Also, the idea and the ability of us to move, and transportation technologies kind of affect those things. But in general, we are going to interact with things that are close to us and interact less with things that are far away, unless we have these mitigating factors that make whatever's far away significant, more significant in some way. So, all right. That being said, I don't talk to my neighbors very much. I just don't. Anyway. All right. The other issue is related to that, which is space-time compression, which is how do we shrink that? How do we compress that? How do we make those distances between people or distances between phenomena smaller? How do we compress that or change that or make it shorter, and so that it's not as big a problem or as big a deal, or doesn't affect us to the same extent or degree? Okay. All right. We are about the questions, most of the content-related ones. Once again, yes, please tell your teacher that I said hello and that I'm glad that she is my friend, because she is very cool. Anyway, so I hope I've answered most of your questions tonight. Just want to let you know that if you still have more questions, I believe Ms. Granquist will be on again sometime this weekend probably, and she can answer these questions in more detail in a different way. You can perhaps clarify them for her if you need to between now and then to kind of get a better idea of what you want. From that, we have some flipped videos online right now for the population, migration, and culture units. You are welcome to go back and look at those. I highly recommend that. I also recommend, if you are really worried about practicing and stressing out about review, and I completely I don't feel like you are alone in that. I recommend that you find a study group. I recommend that you find some individuals that are like-minded in their commitment to excellence, but also are nice people. I've been in study groups with not nice people, and that doesn't work either. Okay, so find a study group, find your teacher's tutorial times, and sleep in their classroom if you have to get to soak up as much from them as you can. I would like to think that they all love you and therefore will want to help you be successful. So I will do as much as I can from my couch here in Sherman, Texas, but they are your best resource, and that's what they get paid the big bucks for, or not the big bucks, but anyway. All right, so guys, thank you for a great session today. Keep your questions coming. Once again, next week at 8 o'clock, we will have another broadcast. All right, awesome. Thank you.